How have you been?
Yeah, so let's
I'm gonna make sure nobody takes it.
Hey guys, welcome everyone to the CryptoCreative Symposium. We're super glad to have you. Woohoo! So in true decentralized style, we've set up a circle. There are more chairs in the back if we run out of chairs, and we're going to start in just about a little over 5 minutes. So feel free to grab some refreshments. We're going to have more food coming in throughout the day. We have a ton of food for the 3:45 break, and then we'll have a whole lot more at the 6 p.m. break. We have cold cuts, we have fish, we have prosciutto, we have fruit, we have like quinoa salad. So we've got a lot of food. You don't even have to leave until midnight if you do not want to. So we are going to try and keep things running on time. The one thing that's different from your typical kind of conference setup, and the reason we're sitting in a circle, is because we really want people to chime in. So if you have a comment at any time, we're going to do that time-honored tradition of just raising your hand. Try not to shout out. If it happens that people start shouting out, okay. If one person is shouting out a little too much, we're going to say, remember, raise your hands. So that's how we're doing it. And for people who are on the next panel, you may want to coordinate. Scott is your moderator here. You should, again, decentralized. Find somebody that has a laptop and get everyone's slides onto that laptop. Or make sure if you have slides that you want to show, your laptop is ready. And we'll just like quickly change out the dongle so that the presenters can introduce themselves with a slide or two. Not a lecture, 3 slides max, and then into the discussion. So thank you so much. See you in 5.
Yeah, I'm gonna go tell Sherone. So we're live streaming. Yeah. And some people are out. Yeah. Oh, yeah. You're not going to get rid of your own stuff. Okay, guys, so we're live streaming from the Creative Tech Week channel on YouTube. So if you do go to YouTube and you find the Creative Tech Week channel, and we are live streaming from there. Sherone, I think is Sherone, is it possible for you to get that URL up on the thing for a second?
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
I just want to tell people I just want to show people the URL for the live stream. So if you look at your notifications, if you just click up there, it should be that. But yeah, it's there. Yeah. Can you guys see that? There. That should be that. Hi. So we don't need to have this. Yeah, it's just there. Hit the back button. There we go. So there we go. Yeah. So if anybody wants to find that on Twitter, and you guys can share with people who aren't able to be here today. Well, it seems like we're set. So let's go. You guys, I'll let you introduce yourself. Do you want me to say a few words? All right, I'll say a few words.
Not even sure if we 100% need the mics. But I would like to introduce to you Sherone Rabinovitz and Cynthia Gayton. Cynthia Gayton is one of the co-hosts of Live on the Blockchain, the podcast. And Sherone has a company that does iOS development and been getting into blockchain consultancy as well. So between the two of them, they have the legal side and the technical side covered of what is the blockchain. Obviously, a lot of experts in the group of you as well. So if people want to pop in with their own comments, or if anyone has questions, again, just raise your hand. And I'll turn it over to you guys. Thank you.
I'm going to start by doing a technical demonstration, and we'll talk about the legal perspectives.
Right, we kind of tried to pull this together and thinking of ways to make this presentation that would make sense. But since nobody is maybe particularly interested in the legal stuff, I'm going second, and the actual practical, useful stuff is going to be introduced first, and then we're going to spend some time talking about tokens specifically, and then opening up to questions. So we'll definitely keep it to our time.
Yes, which is taking you out of the way. Come up to WTF. That's all you.
I was at WTF.
Okay.
Yeah. Where's the fiber?
All right. So I'm going to do a really quick overview of the sort of technological part of this stuff. This is something you can talk about for 3 days easily. I've done that, but we're going to do about 15 or 10 minutes. So we'll start with just what blockchains are. So here's one of those definitions that you see all the time. It's an immutable ledger, distributed on a decentralized, permissionless peer-to-peer network. Quick show of hands, how many people have heard or seen something like along these lines? Nobody? Okay, a lot of people. What does this mean? This is a lot. This means a ton of stuff. For the sake of saving time, I'm just going to concentrate on the immutable ledger part of this. Because before you even put it up on a network, it needs to be immutable as is. So we're just going to concentrate on the beginning of that. So what does that mean? First of all, blockchain is essentially a database. Okay, that's what it is at the core. But unlike traditional databases, the blockchain's contents cannot be altered. And that's the billion-dollar feature. Okay, once something is entered into the blockchain, no one can go back and hack it, falsify it, etc. And that's the key. So bad actors cannot fraudulently falsify existing data. No one can go back in history and change stuff, which is what makes it so worthwhile. And since data is always secure, trust is established. And trust is the thing that makes the world go around, right? So the key is the data's immutability. And so how is this immutability achieved? Cryptographic hashing. So it might sound like a scary computer science term, but it's really not. It basically means that you're taking data and you're scrambling it, okay? So that it doesn't look anything like it used to, or its original form. And I'm going to go into an iPad app that I wrote that demonstrates cryptographic hashing and how the blockchain works. And so we're talking about scrambling data. So this could be helpful. Yeah, I'll try it. When we are performing any transaction, forget blockchain for a second. You're buying anything with a credit card, or you're doing for dinner, or you're stepping out for this, or whatever, making a transaction, you are not actually sending your real information. You're not sending your first, last name, credit card number, social security number, address, etc. No way are you doing that. If you were to do that, thank you, and somebody were to intercept that data, then they could obviously perform transactions fraudulently with their own ill gains. Sounds good. Is that on? Yeah. So I'm going to show you a demonstration of what it means to hash data. I'm going to say there's something named John Smith, and they are paying.
Your dongle.
Sorry.
WTF.
No comments about my dongle. Good. All right. So John Smith just made a $50 purchase. They're using their Visa. And the card's number is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0, 2, 3. That's it. Okay? So 3, 4, 5, 6. So this is the real information, right? But again, if you transmit that and somebody intercepts that, you're in trouble. So you need to scramble it right away. And the way to do that is to run it through an algorithm, a hashing algorithm. I just tap the hash button. And what you get is this. This is called the digest or the hash of the information. Okay? This may look to you like completely random, nonsensical characters, but they're actually not. It's completely deterministic, which is to say, if you were to come in the next day and enter the same input, you would get the exact same hash value. Right now, this starts with 240A and with 9973. If I were to change the 6 to a 7 and rehash it, you get something completely different, right? So it's not the case that just because you change one character in your input, the output, the hash changes to one character. No, it changes profoundly from top to bottom, okay? It's very important to understand that. One character makes a profound difference. I'll go back to 6 and rehash it, and we're back to 248, 9973. Okay, so it's completely deterministic. This is reliable. This is the SHA-256 algorithm. There are many different hashing algorithms. SHA-256 is very popular. It's very powerful. You're dealing with 2 to the 256 power. It's an exponential. It's gigantic. I actually have it on a spreadsheet. Let's expand it. You can see that if you have 1, you have 2 possible combinations. 2 squared is 4, 2 to the 3rd is 8. By the time you get to 2 to the 13th, you're in the thousands. 2 to the 20th, you're in the millions, and this goes on and on and on. I'm not even at 256, and you can see I mean, that's past quadrillions, etc. Okay, so the number of combinations, as I stopped at 150, about halfway through, a little over halfway through. It's a very large number. It's one of those numbers where if you take every pebble of sand on every beach on the planet and multiply it by itself, you're still not there. To hack this, you would need insane amounts of computing power, and that includes quantum computing. Okay, so we're talking about taking data and scrambling it, hashing it, so that it looks like this. and this is what gets transmitted. If someone were to intercept this data, it would be useless to them. There is no reverse engineering kind of algorithm that allows you to take this and get back at the original. Okay? Very important to understand that. The best you can do is take this, put it aside, and then try to enter a bunch of information over and over and over and over again until you match this, and then you hack it. But again, the amount of power that you need to do, the amount of calculation you need to go through is incredibly high. Yeah.
I think someone shouted out, why not? Why is it a more or less one-way trapdoor function?
You can read about elliptical cryptographic hashing algorithms. This is the engine. This is what it looks like. It's a whole thing. You'll go into a rabbit hole for 2 months. Send us postcards, and it's a whole side conversation. But it's not impossible. It's just infeasible. So it's one of those things where on paper, if you do it, you can do it. But practically speaking, it'll take you 370 something years. It's insane. Okay. But it's a one-way trapdoor, mathematical trapdoor. Cryptography is a fascinating topic beyond the scope of this presentation. All right, so this is hashing. So we understand that every character, every change yields a completely different hash value. I'm going to turn auto on so that I don't have to tap the button each time. Okay, so anytime I do anything, the hash changes completely. This, is not reversible, and that's where the safety lies in. Okay, so this is just about hashing. We're talking about scrambling data. Now we're going to switch to my block tab. With blockchain or with any of the block, with Bitcoin, any of the blockchains, I have a button here that I press to generate random transactions. I'll show you the code real quick. I've got an array of names, 10 female names, 10 male names. I've got a function to generate random usernames, and then a function to create a random transaction. So every time I tap this button, that's what it's doing. It's selecting 2 names and then some number between 0 and 500 and creating a transaction. As you can see, every time I add a transaction, the hash value is recalculated as a function of all these characters, right? And you recall that every time I change one character, the hash will change profoundly. It's very, very sensitive. Now, here's where it gets interesting. When it comes to blockchain mining, creating blocks and adding them to the blockchain, what we're going to do is we're going to think of this as a game. We're going to impose a rule whereby we're going to say that the only time we're going to accept a hash value is if it starts with 3 zeros. Okay? Just because for right now. Right now, it does not start with 3 zeros. It starts with EB5 EB. So I could do something like this. I can go here and say it's not 192, it's 192.0. The hash changes, but it doesn't start with a 2. So instead of 0, I'll try 1. That didn't work. I'll try 2. I can sit here all day for the rest of the time and try to do this. Okay? And I may get there, I may not. But either way, doing this is fraudulent. I am changing the transaction from $192 to $1,000 something. Can't do that. So I need to somehow do this while not actually touching the transactions. For this, we create what's called a nonce value. This is short for nonsense. Nonsensical value that you just add to the data that when added to the data and hashed together, then you might get the resulting hash value that you want, which start with 3 zeros. So again, in the nonce, I can enter 0. That didn't do it. 1, 2, 3, etc. That doesn't work, right? It's also not very efficient. I'm just trying different numbers. I can't get 1, 0 out. So naturally, I'm going to write a function that is called a mining function, and it's going to go from 0 and just keep adding 1 to itself each time. And then each time, it's going to take this value, add it to the actual transactions, and hash the whole thing, and we'll see what we get. So I'm going to tap the mine button. Let's do that again. Reset. And run this thing. You'll see that this takes a long time. But right here, show you the code that I have it as now. I have it that I'm looking for 3 zeros right now. Okay. Actually, I'll make it 2 zeros because we'll go much faster. 2 zeros is not very difficult.
So Sherone, can you explain what you're going for here?
I'm going for, in 1 second, this will become very, very clear. I'm going really fast. So here we go, I am mining. And as you can see, it found that while taking the transaction, adding this nonce value, I get a hash value that starts with zeros. This is now okay. I'm accepting this. If I added another transaction, of course, everything changes. I have to remine this block of transactions, right? And here it is, okay? So we've introduced hashing on this screen. We've introduced the nonsensical value. Now we're going to talk about the blockchain. This is where it all comes together. So as you can see, I have a bunch of blocks chained together, okay? Block 0, block 1, 2, etc. I'm going to add a couple of transactions, and I'm going to mine this. I already have the hash calculated automatically. It does not start with, I have 3 zeros now. I'm mining this, and it turns out that 2608 gives me the hash value that I need. Now, the next block, we have a new element. We're introducing another field, the previous block's hash value. And what you can see is as soon as I hash this value gets passed to this block. And it fills its previous block's hash value property. So now I have new transactions coming into this block. I mine this block. The hash value is now a function of the transactions, the nonce, and the previous block's hash. Okay? Once this is hashed, this hash value gets passed to the next block. And so forth. I'm going to mine a couple more blocks, and then I'll show you how this becomes immutable. Remember, the key element now, the new element, is that we've added a previous block hash value to each current block in this last one. All right. These blocks are now all chained together. Because every block contains the previous block's hash value, it is linked to it. That's the chaining. And so now here's where this gets fun. Lisa sent John $485. But John is hacked into the blockchain, and he wants to cheat, and he wants to say that Lisa sent him $4,850. So I'm going to add a 0. What's going to happen, as you've seen now, all it takes is to change one character, and the whole thing changes, right? I'm going to enter a 0, and this will get recalculated. And we'll see what happens to the rest of the blockchain. Boom. Everything turned red. Sirens go off, alarm bells, etc. What happens is this: by adding a new character, a new hash value has been created, right? This hash value automatically got passed into the next block's hash value. Well, that hash value was already being used to mine itself and generate a hash value that started with 3 zeros. Get that? But since that changed, we now need to recalculate this. We need to remine this block, generate a new hash value. This now gets passed to the next one. But since this was changed, then again, we have to remine this. And onward and onward, we can have 10,000 blocks. Each block will have to be remined. You understand? So when you hack any one block, all the successive blocks change immediately, and the whole blockchain screams at you. Okay? Now, I'm only using 3 zeros. If I went in here and I changed the code so I'm asking for 4 zeros, it would take a lot longer, okay, to remine, to find that number, that magical number that gives me a hash that starts with 4 zeros. It takes an incredible amount of computational powers. Let me do this here. Boom. I'm going to mine this. This is why we introduced this 3, 4, 5 zeros, etc. We're basically trying to slow down the entire process. Okay? This will get into the teens of thousands. And this is going to take a lot of time, so much computing power and so much time that your machine will literally heat up and your electricity bill will literally go up at the end of the month. This was actually relatively short, 5,200, but you saw that it was much slower than it was before when it was 2 zeros. Imagine if it was 10 zeros, right? Go back to this. I mean, this quickly goes out of control. With Bitcoin, it's about 19 zeros. So it takes a really long time to mine each block, which means that if you were to hack any block and then went and had to remine each one, right? Each one of these would take, an hour before you could move into the next one, and then the next one. And if you had 5,000 blocks, you would have a whole lot of work to do in order to successfully hack the entire blockchain. You understand? That's why we introduced those zeros. It's a slow down mechanism. It chokes the network. That's why we say it's immutable, because the amount of computations you have to go through makes it infeasible. Now, it's not only that. If you had so much computing power that you could hack each and every single block all the way to the end, and pretend that this blockchain is now valid, that's only one copy of the blockchain. Remember that this is a distributed blockchain. So 1 million other people around the planet have a copy of it. So once you've hacked, if you've hacked your one copy of the blockchain, you'd have to then broadcast it to the network, and everybody else would go, hey, does this look right to you? No, my copy says something else, etc. And everybody would start buzzing and screaming, and like, ultimately this would be rejected. That's what makes the whole thing immutable. That's what makes it such a, a powerful feature. And that's what you're talking about, a disruptive technology, etc., etc. Okay? So I went really fast. I hope that wasn't too geeky for you. I have this, I'll probably put this on the App Store if I get enough feedback that this is worthwhile, so you can play with this on your own. Okay. At least 3 people will download it, good. But that's a very, I mean, this gets a lot more complicated. This is a bird's eye view, don't want to get too geeky. So back to the presentation. We did the demo. Next slide. Now we're going to talk about smart contracts. Smart contract is a computer program that directly controls some digital asset, and this is Vitalik Buterin, who's the brain power behind Ethereum. It's basically it's a little program. It's a piece of code that sits on the blockchain in a particular address that you can send transactions to. So if you want to buy a CryptoCreative, for example, it's a program that knows how to accept your bids or your payments, and then it performs a transaction on the other side as a function of what it is that you sent. If you're looking at a music store, for example, you can have a song that is intelligent enough and has a smart contract attached to it so that it knows if you are a single listener, it'll charge you 1 fee. But if you're a movie producer and you want to use that song as a soundtrack for your film, well, that's a completely different kind of royalty agreement. So it knows how to do that as well. It's a smart contract, okay? And programmatically, the only thing that's different about it than everything that you've been using so far, like when we shop on Amazon, right? It's all digital. We're just sending information and tapping buttons. And magically, 4 days later, a box appears on our doorstep, right? Again, it's just a program that's doing all the work. The difference between a smart contract and the regular programs that you used to work with is that it's decentralized. It's on the blockchain. It isn't owned by Amazon. It's kind of owning, it's self-owning, okay? It's self-executing. I have a real-world example of a smart contract. We've all these ones, right? We've all seen them outside of the 7-Elevens, right? These stalls. This is sort of a smart contract. It eliminates the human being. It eliminates all the paperwork. It eliminates a lot of the sort of bureaucratic hassles. You go to it whenever you want, right? With an app, you scan a code, you type in something, and the door magically opens, right? The smart contract executes on its own without the assistance of human beings. So think of it like that, but kind of more in a virtual way. So smart contracts, cost efficient, they're fast, they're autonomous, right? Decentralized, self-owning, they're very reliable because, again, the blockchain. It's very, very, very hard to hack. It's infeasible. Practically, it's impossible. Right, so we covered blockchain, we covered smart contracts. I'll stop right here. We're going to talk about, I'll quickly just say what a decentralized app is. A DApp, it's a decentralized app. Think of the iTunes store or the App Store, right? We've all used it. Well, the App Store is owned by Apple, right? I can tell you as an iOS developer, when I put an app for sale and it's 99 cents, they get 30%. So I get 69 cents. So 30% is a pretty large cut. But for that, you get the security, you get the authenticity, you know that there are no viruses in the app, etc. So they are providing us with a service, an entire ecosystem, search functions, charts, the leading games, the top selling, right? All this stuff, it's very easy to use, but they take a cut. A decentralized app would be that, but it's not owned by Apple. It's not owned by anybody. It's self-autonomous, it operates on its own. It's peer-to-peer, it verifies itself, authenticates itself, very easy to use. Okay. Hope this all makes sense. I'm going really fast, obviously, because we have 23 minutes and 7 seconds. The last thing we're going to talk about is tokens. And Cynthia and I have been talking about tokens. Tokens are the most nebulous concept. We have many different issues with what tokens are. And as a lawyer, Cynthia is pointing out to me all the sort of legal issues and problems. And the fascinating thing about all of, yet one more aspect that's fascinating about the blockchain is how, yet again, technology outdistances and outpaces the law. And the law is trying to catch up with it. Like, what is this? What are these virtual tokens? What does ownership mean? Et cetera, et cetera. And that's where all the problems are. I think you're right.
Yeah, so let me get to do my slides.
Cynthia slides. Great. Oops.
As if anybody's been paying attention to this space at all, almost every field or any area of inquiry has different words to describe what's going on. And attorneys are no different from the financial folks or anybody else. So when terms are not being used consistently throughout, especially with something like this, the meanings are different. And so for attorneys, when they're looking at these things, whenever anybody uses something like smart contract, and we're trying to find things of what is a contract, right? And is there one? So for me, and I just want to make sure, I teach, and I'm an attorney. I have the podcast on the blockchain. This is my disclosure. All of these opinions are my own. I'm not representing anyone else. If you have any questions, any legal questions, talk to an attorney. I just try to give some overviews of the legal issues. And another thing, so you can't really see this, but I wanted to make an appeal with regard to, we're going to talk, there's going to be some discussion about fungibility and non-fungibility, and having some idea about all those things have different meanings. The fungibility, non-fungibility is basically a financial way of describing the uniqueness or whether something can be divided or not, or how it can be sold. But it's also similar to elasticity in the economic field. So if you're familiar with elasticity, and inelasticity meaning that can something be substituted, or could something be identically substituted, that's an economic term, and it's also similar in concept to the fungibility. And then for lawyers, it's specific performance. If you buy a piece of land, or if you buy a CryptoKitty, and you buy a specific one, you are entitled to that specific one because there are only one of them. So it's the idea of specific performance. Otherwise, if you just say I want a CryptoKitty and it doesn't matter which one, then you can't make demands, right? So all of these things have ramifications. So understanding, while the fungibility is interesting, it may not get you everything that you need to know about what it is that you're purchasing. So I just wanted to make an appeal that perhaps there could be a chart of all how these things are interrelated in different fields, and then people could bring up their take on understanding these things. I think that's important because the words are different. They're terms of art in every industry. And when I'm saying things may not make sense to a lot of people because maybe only lawyers know, y'all speak your own language. So Sherone already did a number of these things, and I wanted to, again, just go briefly through this. The decentralized ledger aspect of it is the financial transactions, and it's supposed to be transparent to everybody on the blockchain. And those of you who are familiar realize that there are private blockchains, so this is not always true, but that is part of the mission. Legal issues regarding blockchain. People ask me, well, is it legal? Are blockchains legal? And the only legal issue primarily is whether or not the currency is legal or whether the transaction itself is legal. So it doesn't matter whether people recognize Bitcoin as being legal, being a currency of some sort. If the transaction or the thing that's being paid for with Bitcoin, the service that's being paid for with Bitcoin is illegal. Right? So there's two things to think about. Is the currency legal, or is the actual transaction legal, and the underlying transaction? So those are usually the issues that people are, when they ask me, is this legal? I can whittle it down to usually these two areas. Tokens, we're going to talk about this later. Basically, they're digital assets. They're representations of tradable goods. There are many different forms and flavors of tokens, and that's where a lot of things get confusing, and we may not be able to clarify that here because, again, it's depending on where you live with regard to understanding tokens helps flavor your impression of what a token is. I've been schooled very, very often that I don't have a complete understanding of what tokens are. So the legal issues, however, related to them, especially for artists that I'm concerned about, is what is it that you're selling when you sell a token that contains your work or has an address going to your work. What does that mean for you as an artist? There are copyright issues, there are contractual issues, there's payment issues, all of those things related to tokens that artists need to understand and pay attention, because this is something I almost say it till I'm blue in the face. But read the terms and conditions related to what it is that you're doing with these things. The copyright area in particular, and especially because I'm in favor of using tokens as a way of building brand. And so that would be, whether it's your trademark or the things that are really part of who you are as an artist. You want to make sure that you're getting it right when you do these kinds of transactions, because this is an identity thing also. All right, and then the decentralized applications, they're designed specifically for blockchain-related transactions. The legal issue with regard to that is they're intended to be open source. They're designed to be open source. That's the benefit of them, is that they're open source. But the legal issues are, of course, who's responsible for bugs if something goes wrong? Because one of the conversations I was talking to Sherone about the other day is somebody said, oh, I really like blockchain because all the liability gets distributed. That's not how it works. That'd be nice, but if you're on the bottom of a food chain and getting a building constructed or something like that, and all you're doing is providing bricks for the construction, do you really want to be responsible for the entire structure? No. So it being distributed has absolutely nothing to do with your responsibility to perform. So I just want to get that.
The risk is not distributed.
Right, the risk is not distributed. But with regard to, then the other idea is, well, the risk is distributed because you don't know who's writing the code. Well, then everybody is in trouble, right? If you can't tell, it's called a Doe claim, or it's a Jane Doe or a John Doe, where everybody gets in trouble. So you can either fess up, and I'm hoping that community element that people talk about a lot in this space, is the community element is going to encourage people to fess up instead of everybody suffering as a result of one bad actor. And then the enforceability of a smart contract of any stripe is, the costs related to that. How is it enforced? Because often if it's not articulated in the transaction information about what happens when things go wrong and how can you enforce somebody doing what said they were supposed to do. And then smart contract, computer code performs transactions on behalf of a blockchain supported platform. So that's the kind of the basic nuts and bolts of it. Ethereum is a platform over which smart contracts can engage in transactions, and so that's like the quick and dirty. But the contract law, because I get presented with this, is this really a contract? And then the answer is yes, for the most part, the transactions, as long as there is some with Ethereum contracts, there is ether or gas that's being paid in order to move things along in the transaction, and people have to agree. There are the equivalent of agreeing to accept the terms related to processing that transaction. So from a legal perspective, even though it's code, there are agreements being made. You as on one end and another person being on the other may not be aware of all these stages of agreement, but they are happening. So offer and acceptance, consideration and gas for Ethereum, the parties. So again, like I said earlier, if you're dealing with a minor or somebody who's not supposed to be entering into these transactions or using a credit card, for example, you still are faced with the same problems as any other contract. With minors, it's even worse because minors could say, I'm not responsible, and they can get out of it. So always be concerned about that. And I think is that it?
Let's talk about tokens.
Yeah.
So tokens are very problematic. There are many definitions, and they're a function of the context in which they're being sold or offered. So I'm going to throw one scenario at you, and tell me what your thoughts are. One of the classic, there's a utility token, but even that there's disagreement on what that exactly is.
Right.
So let's say I've been in the travel industry for 20 years, and I have two partners that we've all been in the travel industry for 20 years, and we've got lots of relationships and lots of ins, and we know how we can get flights for cheap. So we're going to form a company and make that happen. But we need to raise money. We don't want to go to VCs. We don't want to do a Kickstarter. We want to do a token sale. We're going to do an ICO, initial coin offering. And we're going to offer 10 million tokens. And the way that that's going to work is you're going to pay us, you the public, anybody anywhere in the world, can go to our website, And for $10, you get 100 tokens, and for $100, you get 1,000, etc. And what's going to happen is that, well, first of all, this is how we raise real money, fiat currency, right? You're giving us real money so we can hire staff and get servers and databases, etc. You get tokens, where the condition is these tokens are going to be the currency that will enable you to buy those flight tickets on our website. Those tokens only work on our website, only in our ecosystem. But because you believe that you know you're going to get great flight deals, you're going to buy them from us. And there's the additional potential that as we grow and as more people buy tokens, and in 6 months, we're looking at also adding hotels. So those tokens, in and of themselves, even if you don't use them, are going to be worth more money because we as a company are now growing in popularity. Okay? Those are utility tokens because you're already going to disagree, because they allow, their only function is to provide us utility in this business. Now, I know that a lot of people, this is exactly the point, right? A lot of people don't quite know, and I don't know that if you get 7 lawyers in a single panel, they're all going to agree. I've witnessed those disagreements live. So you're saying, so this I know a lot of people are considering a utility token. A token that will have utility in your business one day when it is built. But you're saying this smells like a security, right?
Well, it smells like a security because it doesn't actually do that thing when you buy it, right?
It's a promise of the
It's
future.
a promise, and by your setup is saying that it's going to do all these things. You give me all your money, I'll give you 10 tokens, and then it doesn't do it.
Yes.
Well, I don't care.
So you're saying,
But
so you're saying legally, even if everything is completely kosher and above board, and in 3 months the business is up and running, you can buy flights with those
well,
tokens.
then it becomes something, right?
Okay.
It wasn't it at the beginning when you made the purchase. It didn't have any functionality.
So if I was already up and running and I offer tokens, that would be okay. They would not be securities.
Well, it all depends on how it's been advertised. If you're saying, I mean, because part of the thing, and I'm not an expert in ITO, but I'll just say the issue is whether or not there's a contract that is entered into for the purposes of earning profit based on the efforts of others. So those of you who bought shares, this is what you're doing. Basically, the efforts of others is you're getting dividends or something because the company is doing the work. You're not actually working there. Maybe you are, but for me, as an example, I have shares and I'm not actually doing the work. I'm relying on dividends based on the effort of others. So that would qualify as a security, and I don't have any particular problem with that. So the problem of trying to raise money when people are making promises with regard to a business that's not functioning yet is the element where there's a potential question of fraud. Now, but that's why the security question is always raised.
So right now it's not illegal, but you have to follow certain.
To use ICOs?
Yeah.
No, you can use there's SEC uses or methods, regulations that you have to comply with that often cost more than people are willing to pay. I've been told from anywhere from $150,000 to $500,000 in order to qualify, and you also have to have qualified investors who've been approved. So the promise of this kind of technology is diminished when me or you can't get on the ground level of something that has such potential because of the regulations prohibiting you from even making the purchase. So, you know, the SEC and these regulations are intended to protect folks, but this is new and it's really hard to know how things are going to shake out, but certainly bad press with regard to fraudulent claims is not helping matters.
How often does the SEC meet about these things and revise?
Revise?
Yeah, or
They make decision about who to go after, and so it's not necessarily a revision. They come out with statements, and then they'll bring the cause of action against the party that they're interested in pursuing. And it's usually, I have to say, for the most part, it's been because there's been fraud, where somebody's making promises that they did not keep.
Okay, so
Or could not keep, even if you shouldn't advertise that somebody's gonna get 1,000 times profit on something when you don't even have a product. But it's happened. And what do you do?
People should buy it.
Sorry.
People should buy it.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, it a lot
Buyer
of
beware.
well, it's a little it's different from buying stock. And this is where when I first started looking into this, I was like, oh, am I getting an equity interest when I'm buying, when I'm purchasing via ICO? Do I have an equity interest in that business? Because when I buy a share of McDonald's, I have an equity interest in McDonald's. I can sue at McDonald's if they don't make good on some promise to pay a dividend, right? But with ICOs, there is no equity interest. You have no percentage interest in that company for the most part. And there might be some cases. In fact, I saw something the other day that they're being allowed or folks are being allowed to turn their shares into tokens, and so they would have an equity interest in the company. But that's one thing to realize is this is just like Kickstarter. Most of them are just like Kickstarter, where you get a patch. You don't really get a share of the company. You might get a CD, but you don't get a percentage of that company. You don't actually own a percentage. And that, I think, is the confusing part.
Okay, so we talked about a future business that doesn't quite exist, and we know that there's some problematics there. Now, different scenario. I have a game platform, MMORPGs worldwide. I've got thousands and thousands of gamers, participants, and now I'm offering tokens. Those are more utility tokens because the business exists. And
is the token being used as an integral part of the game?
Yes.
Okay, so to the extent that is the token allowing access to do something, and the business is established, and you're basically substituting some other element in order for you to play the game, because if it already existed, then there was some other way to play the game, right?
What if I don't make it mandatory, but I add it as a feature? So there's a monthly subscription, $99.99. But now, if you want to get that magical sword or the extra, shield or whatever it is, then you can now buy tokens with real money, and that will allow you to even barter with other players across the multiverse of your game, etc. So I'm adding another component. I'm not substituting.
Well, I mean, to the extent that, like I already said, I'm not an expert in this, and so much relies on what is being told to the producers. Okay, so to the extent that this is all, for example, this is all that's being said, and this happens all the time. People's websites say certain things with regard to token use, and then you actually look at the code, and the code is different. It's not reflective of what was on the website. This more times than I even want to count, that the marketing and advertising element of it is different from the white paper and is different from the code.
But they're kind of trusting, or they're relying on the fact that many people don't know code. So I
don't know. Sometimes I really don't know if it's intentionally deceptive. Because how do you incentivize people to do things without stripping out all the math? That doesn't intrigue me. I don't like to see all the math. But nowadays, this is what the SEC is doing now. This is actually pretty awesome to me, because they're getting information from Telegram chats, they're getting chat information, they're learning the code. So it's a lot harder to hide if you are intentionally doing something. So it's while we talked about this, I'd rather have some sort of safe harbor where people are able to test this out and see how it works before you don't do anything, because it chills. Regulation in this instance might be chilling innovation, because this is brand new. We have lots and lots and lots of technology and innovation in this country that was allowed to at least take off a little bit. And unfortunately, I'm hoping, and I've seen a lot of press coming out of the SEC and some of the regulatory agencies that is trying to come up with a path forward that doesn't chill innovation.
We're always doing the cool, fun stuff, and you guys come in and ruin the party with your legalese.
Hey.
All right, we have 3.5 minutes, so let's talk about one more.
No, you all need to. Do you have any questions?
I want to talk about the art tokens. One last context.
Okay.
Crypto kitties, crypto punks, crypto you name it. That kind of token is yet another kind of a token. I am a photographer. I take a photo. I want to make a 200 edition. right? I tokenize it. Explain that type of token and what the problems are or things kind of look to.
Well, think with that is that you're actually buying the thing.
It
exists. The thing exists. So then it's just a matter of what can you do with the thing? What can you do? What can you do with it? And do you know what you can do with it? Do you know what you can do with that image? Do you know what you can do with that token as a purchaser? And if you're the artist who's preparing whatever art is on there, do you know what is going to happen with that art? So the layers are not necessarily, with this, it's a little bit different because the thing exists. Nobody's buying an unknown thing.
It's a digital image at least. Right.
So I think the risk is a little low, is lower because it exists. It's not an ICO. You're not, planning on making money due to the efforts of others. It's just like when you buy a trading card and you hope maybe the value goes up, but also you could be collecting because you happen to like cats. There are different reasons why people buy and collect things.
Right. And
this is just another example.
Okay, we have 1 minute and 55 seconds. Maybe we can negotiate, I don't know. Are we doing Q&A?
If you guys have 1 minute, 55 seconds.
Is there any questions?
So question, so you said you're gonna make 200 photographs, you're making 200 prints, but then you clarified and said 200 digital files. What prevents somebody from cloning the digital file? Nothing.
Nothing, but it wouldn't be attached, it wouldn't be digitally signed, it wouldn't be authenticated on the blockchain.
So, but if it's digitally signed, couldn't you just take the signature out?
I'm sorry?
Couldn't you just take the signature out like anything, like all XMP data is in my Photoshop files? You can strip that out. It's illegal, but you could do it.
This is a really interesting point. It's more psychology at this point than emotion than anything else.
Okay.
But once you go to an auction of digital arts and you see people spending tens of thousands of dollars on a digital asset, which is perfectly copy-pastable, right-click, save it to your desktop, you realize this other generation, other mentality has turned the corner, and for them to own a digital asset, and you will have the exact same copy of what I have, but I have the certificate of authenticity, which could be digital. That makes a difference. Truly makes a difference. At the end of the day, it's all about emotion, especially when it comes to art. Right?
Of course.
And if you can explain to me why that guy spent $1.2 million on that baseball card, then
But it's
you
a
can also
physical,
explain why somebody would.
But it's a physical
The
card,
thing
that
is
baseball
not
card.
the image, it's the right to say, I'm the only owner of this thing. So anyone can copy the image. You said it's like an edition of 200. It's not an edition of 200 because anyone can copy the image. Anybody can download it. But so it's not the image that's protected. It's the ability to say, I'm the owner of this thing.
And I can resell it if I.
Exactly.
And I can
It's the community too that.
And there's a community that cares about the authenticity.
But so-
It's like for thousands.
Is the ownership title? What's got value?
Well, so in the ownership title, if I own a Picasso, I could put it on my wall, but I can't photograph and sell prints of it. I don't own the title to that. So I mean, obviously it gets very nuanced. Obviously I care.
Great, good.
Time's up.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Cynthia Gayton and Sherone Rabinovitz. You guys are both from Philly?
I'm actually
Arlington, Virginia, and
Said Tel Aviv, I didn't mean that.
And Tel Aviv.
Philadelphia, yeah.
Tel Aviv and Philly. So guys, I did not build in any wiggle room between the panels. So we are now starting the panel about politics. So open, decentralized, does that mean disorganized? Does it mean anarchy? Is it libertarian? Is there room for people who are conservative? We have a couple of people coming up right now, moderated by Scott Draves. We have Karen Ottoni. Hold on a second. We have Matthew Schutte. Awesome. And we have Saraswathi Subbaraman. That was it.
No, I'm starting to step out from my guy.
Did I see Theo Goodman come in here? Hey, do you want to jump in on this philosophy panel? I feel like you'd be awesome on it. And I also want to add that the sort of lecture part of this symposium, which was teaching, which was great and awesome, and we totally appreciate it. And if you have questions for Sherone and Cynthia, hopefully they'll be around at the break. But the lecture part of the program is over. So now it is conversational. We're going to welcome Theo Goodman also to our panel here. I know that's really bad for the microphones. Test. All right. You guys take it away. Scott, do you want to talk about, you want me to introduce you or you want to say your own decentralized story?
Why don't you go ahead?
Okay, so Scott Draves, in addition to being my husband, has another claim to fame. And that is in 1999, he started the Electric Sheep screensaver, which is run on a decentralized model, a render farm, to make these really intense graphics that take a really long time to create. And so in order to do that, he's had to leverage 500,000 people around the world and their computers' downtime to make these graphics, and then brings them all back to a central location where they are compiled and turned into video. So he's been doing decentralization for a long time, and I'm going to turn it back over to you guys.
Thank you, Isabel. And well, you're going to do your slides first, so I think you're in a good place.
Okay.
Yeah, so we have Matthew Schutte, who's going to introduce himself first.
Great. Yeah, my name is Matthew Schutte. I'm the director of communications for Holo Chain. Holo Chain has been called an evolution of blockchain. So we're not the whole introduction that you guys got just a minute ago, not quite accurate for us. We're sort of a slightly different technology that may be the next thing coming, at least we hope it is. Holochain is a new way of running truly peer-to-peer applications. We can go ahead and hit the next slide. The World Economic Forum has called this one of the most integral technology projects in the blockchain space. And we didn't just hit copy-paste on Bitcoin. We really took a deep look at what does it take to design new systems of communication and new patterns of collaboration that can actually function and thrive. So we think we've solved a number of the problems that the blockchain world faces around scalability, speed, cost, environmental friendliness, etc. If you want to learn more, you can go to holochain.org. Again, I'm Matthew Schutte. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Matthew. And we also have Karen Ottoni. Do you have a...
Switching computers.
So if you click present, please, and then. So my name is Karen Ottoni. I'm with Hyperledger. What Hyperledger is a consortium of about 245 companies right now that are members of this consortium across many different industries and many different sizes of companies, from very small startups to large enterprises as well. And it's a project that's housed under the Linux Foundation, which is a foundation that's been around for about 15 years now, which was very much involved in the open source community for the development of software and the internet. Nice. It's a short video that just introduces what Hyperledger is.
Welcome to the Hyperledger Greenhouse, an incubator for open source blockchain technologies for business, hosted by the Linux Foundation. So what does that mean exactly? Let's start here with you. You're a business, large or small, participating in a commercial ecosystem. Your business partners and peers want to do business with you, but in order to do that, you'll need a ledger. This ledger keeps a record of your transactions, along with many, if not all, of the other transactions in the network. It is vitally important to know that your copy of the ledger is identical to everyone else's. So you'll need a distributed ledger. It's a new kind of network database that lets everyone in an ecosystem keep a copy of a common system of record. But how does everyone agree on which transactions succeed or fail? That's where Hyperledger software comes in. This plant is actually software that each business runs on systems it controls to broadcast out its transactions with other parties and receive, validate, and interact with messages delivered by others. With any network like this, a particular software standard is used to keep everyone in sync. But there are other ways to build these kinds of networks, using different consensus algorithms and different smart contract languages. There will be many different ledger networks out there. Ideally, they would all be able to interoperate due to certain common properties, much like how the Linux community uses various operating systems with a common kernel. At Hyperledger, we're growing many different kinds of ledger technologies. Here, you'll find communities of software developers working together to propel open source blockchain frameworks and tools into the future to deployment and adoption. Businesses with strict blockchain requirements trust Hyperledger because it's hosted by the Linux Foundation, and its projects are developed by an open source community. Developers can collaborate on a global level across company and industry lines to create innovative, modular open source components and platforms. It's this open source approach that allows for the kind of transparency, longevity, collaboration, community, and of course, security that blockchain needs to become more mainstream, which is what Hyperledger is all about. Hyperledger projects are meant to help you focus on developing your business solutions and feel confident that the legal, technical, and organizational infrastructure is in place, thanks to Hyperledger and the Linux Foundation. These are all open source projects, and anyone is welcome to pick them up and use them, no fee or permission required. Of course, this only represents a fraction of what open source blockchain technologies can do, now and in the future. So it's time to ask yourself, who will you trust with your trust network?
Thank you.
And Saraswathi?
Hey, I'm Saraswathi Subbaraman. I don't have any slides. I am the art director for Ethereal Summit, one of the co-creators, and that's happening tomorrow. It's an arts blockchain event, so that was definitely one of the things there. And you guys, I hope you can. Hope you guys can attend. You're welcome. There's actually a discount code CryptoCreative if you're interested. It's 2D event starting tomorrow, and I also work on a project called Circles, which is not a new blockchain. Actually, it's fairly blockchain agnostic, but it is built on, right now, the Ethereum network. And it is essentially a community-governed complementary currency that ambitious goals to become a basic income. So I guess that would make us anarcho-communists. And yeah, so that's I'm a design lead and one of the project leads. And so yeah, thanks. Oh, if you want to learn more about Circles, you can go to joincircles.net. Thanks.
And Theo. Hi, I'm Theo Goodman. I'm I have slides ready. I'm a co-founder of Rare Pepe Foundation, memeing on the blockchain since 2016. And I also work for Proof of Work Media, which is a London-based creative studio and strategy consulting company. And yeah, now I'm going to read my entire CV report. No.
And hash each item on it, please.
Yeah, I'm going to tokenize it, yeah.
So I thought, and audience, please feel free to interrupt us and join the conversation at any point. And I thought I would start out by asking the panel a question, starting with Karen. How did we get to where we are today? I think there's a reason that everybody's excited about Bitcoin and blockchain. The reason these things are succeeding is because there was sort of a need. Even before they existed, that need existed. Even before sort of the blockchain existed, our society had we're in a sort of a situation that needs it. So sort of what are the problems that blockchain can address?
Okay, sure. So, well, the genesis of blockchain happened at the same time as Bitcoin in 2008 when someone by the name of Satoshi Nakamoto produced this white paper that launched the Bitcoin network and the whole concept of using blockchain, which brought together ideas that had existed previously before in cryptography, in distributed ledgers, but brought them together in this unique way that created this new thing that is cryptocurrency and blockchain. And what's unique about it is that it allows for you to have, so someone asked a question earlier in the last session about, oh, can I just copy that picture and then someone can just sell that picture again, right? So one thing that this technology allows for is a way for you to really apply unique identifiers to anything that you want it to be. A token that represents your car lease can be a token that represents work, or a token that represents who you are as well. And the way that the technology works, without getting into too much of the details, it records and timestamps this in a way that it's irrefutable who owned it and when they owned it and who they transacted with, right? If they gave that owner to someone else or sold something to someone else or paid someone else. And so it also allows us to do that in this distributed peer-to-peer format, right? So in instances where we generally would have had to go through many different steps or many different processes to get some sort of function done, whether it be get insurance for your car, buy a painting, or just send money from here to India. There's normally a lot of different steps and time involved in that. And because of the security and because of the distributed nature of this technology, you're eliminating a lot of those steps, which can make it faster, cheaper, and easier.
Thank you. And Matthew, can you tell me a little bit about the history of sort of blockchain, and especially since you pitched Holo as possibly the future of blockchain, sort of where we came from and where we're going?
Sure. So blockchain came essentially out of the cypherpunk community, which was a group of folks, many of whom some of the people on this panel know, that was really interested in trying to enable people to interact or transact in ways that weren't going to get them clubbed, right? So the focus was on freedom from constraint. I want to be able to do an interaction with you, and I don't want that guy to come hit me with a stick for having done so. That was their emphasis. And as a result, the thing that sort of emerged out of that sort of took the world by storm, Bitcoin, and then later the technology underlying that, blockchain, was focused on digital anonymous transactions, essentially digital anonymous cash. And that's a specific thing. And the way that they solved that was they had everyone hold on to a copy of everything. So they could agree, about where things were, who owned what, etc. So that was a specific approach to solving a specific problem. I think this is going a much more interesting place than that, however. So the focus was freedom from constraint, an important problem, but not the only problem in the world. I think there's a much more interesting thing that is about freedom to constrain. Freedom to constrain yourself so that you can enter into a game with another group of people who are similarly constraining themselves so you can play a game together. Right? When you play cards, you don't get to do anything. You constrain yourself to, I'm only going to hold on to 5 cards. I can only pick up another card when it's my turn, right? You're adopting a set of constraints, and it enables you to play, to generate a shared social space inside of which you can actually make yourself vulnerable in particular ways, right? You can try new things. For us, we call this mutual sovereignty, this idea that I'm going to choose to play some way, and you're going to choose to play some way, and we shouldn't have to have the support of anyone else in order to do that. We shouldn't need to rely on a company or a legal system in order to be able to do that. And what we believe this leads to is not just some anonymous cash stuff and some, oh, I'm the only one who owns that CryptoKitty stuff. It's much more vibrant forms of collaboration and creativity that we haven't really been able to pull off previously. So, yeah.
Thank you. And Saraswathi, can you explain maybe sort of what are the problems in our current society? And without sort of explaining what Bitcoin is and how it solves them, but just what's the problem that needs to be solved, or that we have the opportunity to solve now?
So first, let me tell you what Bitcoin is. I mean, I don't need to tell you what Bitcoin is, but I mean, the Genesis block of Bitcoin did say that we were on the brink of a financial collapse. Yeah, in the interim, we gave about $17 trillion to banks, and nothing about our economic structure has changed. So we are on the brink of another economic collapse, logically. And I guess what's cool about blockchains is that they imply a redistribution of power by decentralizing hypothetically power, but they don't necessarily do that actually yet. What I've seen, having worked in the space now for almost 2 years, is more of a decentralization of capital, and capital is power in capital system. So kind of a re-centralization of power among technocrats and folks who are in the know and folks who have access. So I think there's an inevitable moment that will come when we redistribute wealth and power. At least I think there's never been a moment like this where we can redesign some of the rules around how money is created and distributed. So so I guess that's really what's not necessarily up for grabs, but like a really important and critical thing to, I think, take time with and be creative and considered about.
Well, thank you. And one problem that I see maybe as an artist is getting paid for my work. So maybe, Theo, this is something that you could address. How can sort of Bitcoin and blockchain help artists get paid?
Okay, well, what you could do is you could just make a picture and then make some tokens with it and sell it. Sounds really easy. I mean, don't be totally afraid from the first panel that told you everything's illegal and you're going to go to jail. So first of all, you have to experiment with it a little. So go on and just do it. Try to figure out how to make a token. You can make a token on the Bitcoin blockchain, a token on the Ethereum blockchain, make a token on private, whatever that works. There's all kinds of options out there. So just do that. First, you're going to need to do that if you want to make money, because you're going to need to know how it works. You're going to have to experiment with it. You're going to have to make some mistakes first yourself. So you're going to need, that's going to be your basic tech understanding. And then, yeah, then you're going to need to, so there was the question we had earlier. It's probably going to be the main question of the whole evening. I can just copy that photograph 20 times or whatever. So in my opinion, what needs to happen there is there needs to be a curator or validator or whatever you want to call it, which is a trusted third party that says that token belongs to that piece of artwork. And the artist is the person that generated the tokens. So it needs to be that the artist generates the tokens, and there's somebody that's going to say, this artist, this artwork belongs to this token. Because if you don't have that, there's nothing to prevent me from making a token also and saying, no, 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 that's my artwork. This is the real token. That's why you need to have somebody that says that. For example, just a short hyper speed of what happened with the whole Rare Pepe thing. So it just started spontaneously as a total joke. And I'm not the first guy that did it. I just happened to be around them. And yeah, the first thing that Mike did, which was the guy that thought of it, is he made a directory of all the cards. Because the first thing that happened was in the Bitcoin talk thread is somebody tried to do something similar to what I said. They tried to make a card and say, no, 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 you should buy this one instead. It's a very similar image to the one of the original artist. You see what I mean? So they basically kind of copied him. So then said, okay, no, it's only the official ones that I represent are in the directory. So you need to figure out if it's a community or maybe your own. Maybe you have enough trust. You have a trust factor yourself in your own brand on your own website. Saying, this is the token. I'm going to link to the token. And don't buy another token because this is the real one. So the reason that I said you need to experiment is because, in my opinion, if you guys want to make money with it, then you should be the one generating the tokens, and other third parties can be the ones that did what I said. They say, okay, I'm going to vouch for this token that it belongs to this artwork and this artist did it, or whatever other things a third party might do. So that's final thing, because that's the whole thing, is that you should, if you're the artist, you should control the private keys for your token. Otherwise, what's the point? I can use my SQL database or Apache or whatever. There's not a huge difference. So if you want to really have control of it, then you need to be the one who's creating.
Thank you. It's great to hear the stories of how that happened by somebody who was there when it happened. So now back to Karen. I have a question. I hear a lot about, when we're talking about Bitcoin and blockchain, I hear a lot about open source also. How is open source related to blockchain? What about the philosophy is sort of shared? And what about forking? That's sort of part of the power of open source, and does that have sort of an analog in the blockchain world?
Yeah, because you can absolutely fork in blockchain as well.
Yeah, so I don't know what that means, so maybe you can explain.
Okay, so so first open source. So open source just means that your the code of whatever it is that you're developing is freely open and available on the internet for anybody to download and use. So Bitcoin is open source. We can all go home today and download the code for Bitcoin blockchain and become a node on the Bitcoin blockchain. You may not want to do that because your energy bill will get pretty high, but you can do that, right? You can also, if you wanted, fork the Bitcoin blockchain and create basically a copy of it. You won't be connected anymore to the large Bitcoin community that's constantly adding to that chain. You'll be in a different one, and it'll be your community of one. But you could convince others to join you if you wanted. And so that's kind of how open source works in the blockchain world. With Hyperledger, what we're doing is building on the open source community that Linux Foundation has promoted for the last 15 years. So focusing on, okay, so we've got like a lot of different versions of blockchains, different types of distributed ledger technologies, and they're going to be relevant for different types of use cases. You're going to want different capabilities and different features. And so in the Hyperledger community, we're acting like a greenhouse, kind of like the video showed you, as an incubator for these different kinds of distributed ledgers in open source format. So anybody can contribute to the code, anybody can use the code, similar to what I just explained about Bitcoin. You can take the code from one of our popular frameworks, Hyperledger Sawtooth. You can then download that and create your own blockchain network, invite whoever you want to join in on it, and then you've got your own Hyperledger Sawtooth network. You can then also say, hey, there's this issue with Hyperledger Sawtooth that isn't working for me, and you actually figured out how to fix it. So then what you could do is contribute back to the community by submitting a code update and contributing back to the development of that project. So that's kind of how open source works. It really is this sort of distributed community that's working to build up a technology that fits for some sort of purpose. That explains open source.
Yeah, that helps a lot. And so I want to send a question back to Matthew. And so the Holo Cloud sounds really interesting. I was reading the website over the past few days. One thing that I want to ask about is its sort of privacy. And if the Holo Cloud is a new version of the internet and can replace the cloud we have today, the blockchain stuff, I can read. The blockchain is completely public. I can read everything on it. And so is the Holo Cloud also completely public? And how could I run a sort of a private application, one that I don't want? If I want to run a web service that has private information in it, can I run it on the Holo Cloud? Is that possible?
Yeah, thanks. So I should make something visible first, and that is that we have two systems with two projects. So Holo has Holo Chain, which is it's not even a platform, it's a pattern, right? It's not like Facebook, it's more like HTML. How many of you have paid your HTML bill recently? Right? Why? Because it's not a place you go, it's a way that you speak. Right? It's a way that you craft it. You put a little bracket, B, bracket, it's more than, wow, that's bold. Okay? So Holo Chain is this pattern for how to build and run applications without needing web servers, without needing miners, without needing cryptocurrency. It's a commons-based pattern. So if you wanted to run some stuff with some other folks, you would run it on the devices of those folks that you were wanting to interact with. That's Holo Chain. The thing that you were referencing is Holo Host. That's the first big company, basically, the first big flagship application that we're building on Holo Chain. And it's basically a peer-to-peer marketplace for application hosting. Today, when a developer creates a website or an application, they usually don't serve it to users themselves. Right? When you type in Facebook.com, you probably go to Facebook, but for most of those smaller websites, you go to Amazon Web Services. That query gets serviced by a bunch of computers in a big data warehouse somewhere in Oregon or something like that, right? So Amazon is the third most valuable company on the planet. Their application hosting division, Amazon Web Services, makes up about 10% of their revenues, but it's responsible for more of their profits than the entire rest of the company combined. So app hosting is the cash cow of the third most valuable company on the planet. You can think of what Holo Host is trying to do as basically do to Amazon's cash cow what Uber did to taxis, right? Or what Airbnb did to the hotel industry. With Airbnb, you rent a spare bedroom and turn it into money that can help you pay your mortgage. With Holo, you rent spare storage and processing capacity on your device, kind of like what Scott was doing with all these other folks. They were contributing, right, their spare capacity to be able to do this work. It was helping create really interesting art. Well, with us, you can do that to help serve out applications but you get compensated as a result. Can you do private stuff? So there's two things there. One, Holo isn't where all those applications run. It's just the accounting backend. If you're wanting someone to basically host websites to enable visitors, not people who are actually participating in running that application, but just somebody who's like, I want to check that out. Right? Why would a group of folks who are running if we were running an Airbnb app and we had places to stay and things like that, we don't want just early geeky techie holochain adopters to be able to book rooms. We want anybody to be able to book rooms. And so Holo is a bridge. It's something where any of us could go, yeah, you can use the spare capacity on my device to serve websites out to visitors so that anybody can open a website, a laptop, go to ourbnb.coop or whatever it is, and all of a sudden they're able to book a room. So it's sort of a bridge there. In addition to the fact that there is no one big holochain, every one of them is its own little private social space. Even if you were running something big, you can make use of encryption and other processes for being able to have data visible in public and yet not meaningful to anybody who doesn't have the keys to decrypt it. I'll sort of leave it at that for right now.
Cool, thank you. And now a question for Saraswathi. How does the decentralization differ from anarchy? Since you mentioned anarchy or communism, I think this one might be good for you.
But
This is a serious question, though.
it was kind of a joke, but yeah, I was just reading this article that Vitalik wrote about different kinds of decentralization. And he really sticks to computers. Vitalik is essentially the founder of Ethereum, which you guys didn't know that. And I mean, decentralization just means a lot of different things in different contexts. It doesn't really have an overarching meaning, and anarchy doesn't necessarily implicate anything decentralized aside. I mean, or it could. And I mean, there's so many different kinds of anarchy, and there's so many different kinds of decentralization. So.
Yeah, sure. I'd say that like anarchy is kind of anyone doing whatever they want, and decentralization is anyone being able to do the same things as anyone else. So kind of decentralization is like a platform on top of which I guess anarchy as a concept would manifest, because anyone has at least the same opportunity to interact with the system at large.
Yeah, I mean, decentralization does implicate, at least from a technical standpoint, a set of rules. So, like, there is a common ledger, for example, and there is a base set of hard-coded rules. So, yeah, and so in that regard, if that were the platform, you could have an anarchy on top of it. But like, yeah, anarchy isn't necessarily, but they're not mutually inclusive, right? So like,
well, anarchy is like what we do individually, and decentralization are the rules we agree upon, right? That's the great thing, is if we don't agree on these rules, then we're going to agree on these rules. And kind of in the long run, whichever set of rules kind of generates the most abundance generally will be the set of rules that kind of grow and spread in a very like Darwinian sense.
Does anyone else in the audience have what do those things mean to you?
So I'm speaking in terms of anarchy. I forget your name to the glasses. Theo.
Theo, yeah.
Theo?
Yeah.
So your point on needing some sort of this is real, this is not, speaks to this rooting question of what role does morality play in a system that's based off of no governance?
Well, it's a tool. Blockchain and cryptocurrency and all that stuff is just like a hammer. So it doesn't have morality. As a hammer, it doesn't have morality. But just because the hammer hit you on the thumb, sorry. So it doesn't. And you can also build a Stalinistic dictatorship on blockchain. Yeah, there's nothing stopping you do it.
I mean, who's deciding what's real? Again, not everyone has a common standard of morality.
It's just a So we have to, the users would have to, or the people using it would have to decide what the morality is. Margaret?
Well,
Sure. So what are these?
you can stand up if you're gonna talk about the audience. In your example, speaking to the who owns the painting, that's an example of what is just and what is not. Injustice is just a form, it's a capacity of morality. So all I'm asking is, in a system that's founded in the heart of the system is in the absence of governance and just facts, what role does, and you can insert morality with justice, what role does that play in your system?
Sure. Well, I mean, no, it's not my system. It's okay. No, it's okay. It's okay. I want to make sure I'm moral when I answer. So first of all, there is governance. Okay, there are set rules to how each blockchain works, and that is the governance of that blockchain. And you can decide if you want to use it or not. So there is governance. For example, in Bitcoin, there is an address, and that address has a certain amount of Bitcoin, and you can send it to somebody, and so on and so forth. Only the person that controls that address can sign this address cryptographically in order to send it to somebody else. That is an example of governance, because there is a rule to that. Now I have to figure out where the morality came in. So so this is, again, it's a tool in itself. It sounds like a blockchain or Bitcoin has no rules. There are rules. So what one of the tool features of this, or at least of public blockchains, which is also a debatable topic, is immutability. So that means they are censorship resistant. That just means I can send anybody a Bitcoin anytime I want, any time of the day. Nobody can tell me I can't do it. Now, I might be breaking the law or whatever. That's secondary. Nobody can stop me from doing it. Okay? So that's so of course, you can't also stop a terrorist from sending Bitcoin, because anyone can do it at any time that has one. So you see what I mean? So it goes both ways. So it could be used for good or evil, just like with any tool. It just comes down to that. The whole thing with the art is just a specific use case that still needs to be discussed. I mean, everybody here is probably, or somewhere, talking about standards and how that should work and everything else. It's still being hammered out. Get it hammered out, Margaret?
So a lot of people think that anarchy is chaos, and anarchy is that the collective agrees on the rules. So it actually sort of does tie in very completely to the blockchain.
I would say anarchy is not, anarchy is not the collective agrees on the rules. Anarchy is everyone is imposing their own rules. But in the greater society, it pays to have collective rules to agree upon. So I like to think of it as yin yang, because people get caught up on like, what's the governance part or the freedom part? But there's no freedom without governance. So we are collectively agreeing on the rules by putting our economic weight behind, let's say, the Bitcoin blockchain. That was like, okay, these Bitcoin rules are good enough that I will stake my economic survival value on the Bitcoin blockchain because I can express my freedom the most. And if it no longer serves my needs, I will choose a different system, and I will, funnel my value, whatever that means, into that system, right, and support that. So I think
one of the things I see about decentralization is that I think it's more meritocratic in a lot of ways. So if you look at our current monetary system, right, we have trusted all this power to central bankers who have not necessarily been elected, who have not actually necessarily had the right experience, they haven't actually been in markets. So in a centralized system, it's very easy for the wrong people to get into positions of power. Whereas I think in a decentralized system, it's the voices of reason, the best dev teams, for example, it's those people come out on top. So I don't think that it's chaos at all. It's just a more meritocratic system of figuring out who runs the show. Currently, the bankers run our monetary system, right? But in the future, it'll be the devs that run, and that's already happened, right? And devs are better than bankers.
It's not going to be the devs, it'll be the investors. The devs work for the investors.
Anarchy, like I said, is volunteerism, but decentralization, just to get it clear, it's to eliminate the center. It's a peer-to-peer. instead of, say, I want to send money to you. I send a check to my bank, and it goes through the SWIFT machine, and then goes to your bank, and then goes to you. We have this thing in the settlement. You know, or like a Google Doc. I send something up to the Google Doc, then you go make an edit, and then he pulls it down, and we all use that. That's centralization. Decentralization is a Google Doc without Google. I make a change, it goes to everybody. You make a change, it goes to everybody. It's like a torrent, you know, like peer-to-peer. So it's not about all these other things. It's just about getting rid of the gatekeepers, the centers, the trusts. It's just people to people, person to person.
So who's in that situation when it is peer-to-peer, who's in control? Is it
the protocol? The thing we've agreed upon. And if I
people that have the mics control.
So I think it's really interesting this idea of anarchy, because it was this technology did come about as a reaction to the financial crisis, and it is anarchic in the traditional sense, in the sense that it is the first globally viable way to transact that isn't associated with a national government, right? There is no Bitcoin government, there is no Ethereum government. Now there is a element, as people have mentioned here, of centralization of the developers, right? It's not a fully decentralized system yet. Like, we still, if Vitalik says something, then it's law, right? And we saw in the past year, I don't know if you were following, Bitcoin had some existential crises last year with whether or not it would split or be updated in a certain way. And so there were these different camps, and different camps are trying to influence a decision and affect that decision, right? That posed a very interesting existential and moral question, maybe, to the entire blockchain or Bitcoin community. Is like, okay, wait, hold on, I thought we were supposed to be distributed, I thought we were supposed to be decentralized, and yet these groups are in power, and they're trying, the miners and the different organizations that are involved, the developers, the foundations, they're trying to affect what the direction this is going in, right? And so it's still very new and emergent. It's not at a level that fits the...
So why should I trust a bunch of miners in China more than central bankers here in the US?
Well, I think you should trust it with a grain of salt, absolutely, right? I think no one's advocating for you to put everything you own into one currency or everything you do into one blockchain either. I think you have to still kind of wait and see what's going to happen in terms of which ends up being the more stable community, or which ends up providing you the most value proposition. You could end up deciding that there is one already that does that, and that's fine.
I want to say about the devs and control. I mean, that's true. That's true to an extent. But if devs make software and nobody runs it, well, then who cares? So there's also users that can decide what software to run in case of a node, for example. So it's not totally 100% power of devs, but they do have a lot of power. It's true.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you were to reverse your question, I didn't mean to throw out the word anarchy and cause such a fuss. I meant it with a much lighter touch. But I mean, the similarity between decentralization and anarchy is statelessness. And in like a neoliberal capitalist society, that does just end up being who has power in other ways, and markets running the show. And I think like what's unique about this space, maybe from the context of not necessarily anarchy, but like alternative economic and political models, is the sort of pioneering chasm before us around like how people coordinate and how people cooperate, and what the new incentives and new incentive structures that will sort of facilitate another inevitable economic structure. Because I mean, whatever it's going to be, how that kind of things form, and yeah, and I'm glad we're all part of the conversation. Hands up.
Mr. Bauer?
Okay, yeah, decentralization. Yeah, so quick question. So I think like in many cases for states, there's a clear conflict of interest for them like being involved in the more implications of blockchain technology, right? So like similar to like Elon Musk's OpenAI, there are groups that are like paying attention to AI and more implications for other groups doing that in the blockchain space.
There are definitely folks looking at the ethics in distributed computing systems and decentralized computing systems. There's a number of these folks are in the academic world at present. There's a woman named Jaya Clara Brecki, based in the UK, who's doing some really interesting work around this. There are others as well. I did want to sort of say one other thing on sort of touching on the questions from before. I completely agree with Saraswati's comments here. I do think that blockchain intent, that a lot of the intent behind blockchain was to decentralize power. However, intent doesn't get you outcomes. Architecture does. And the architecture is an architecture of centralization. Just to be clear, it's a centralization of perspective. The whole innovation in Bitcoin was you could get a whole bunch of different computers seeing the world in exactly the same way, identical copies of a ledger. That concentration of power that is occurring is not an accident. It's a direct result of that architecture. If you want a different outcome, you need a different architecture. Regarding the morality question, these are about social relationships. We can't solve morality with tech. It's always contextual. Whether something is right or wrong is a judgment that we have to make and that we learn through experience. When we try something, oh, that didn't work. Maybe we shouldn't do that anymore. And eventually we get to a place where we go, yeah, that sucks. Let's not support that kind of behavior. But this is about social relationships, not handing it off to some uber technology that's going to solve it all for us. We have to solve it for ourselves. Technology can assist us with that, but that's all it can do. Thank you.
All right, so we're going to end it on that note. We have 45 minutes to discuss these issues amongst ourselves. We've got an array of snacks over here. We have sodas, we have flavored waters, we have regular waters. There's some wine if you want to get started a little early on the party. We've got a lot of booze later. In the two gallery rooms over on the south side here, we have some really interesting tech art that has been put together. This is our Arts Hub for Creative Tech Week. So we have artists who work with software and electronics who are displaying things on that side. And there's also some kind of chill hangout space. You know, we couldn't afford like the rugs and the couches, but there is another room, the engine bay, where the fire engines used to park over there. In 45 minutes, we'll be firing up again, talking about smart contracts, IP, and royalties on music. And so whoever's on that panel, let's meet now at the table. And if there's somebody who wants to be on that panel, who feels like they have something to add, meet us at the table and let's talk it through. Thanks.